So welcome everyone. My name is Gihan Pereira. I'm a business futurist, and today I want to talk about some of the biggest challenges that we're going to be facing in the year ahead. And it's based on some research that was done by KPMG, and I'll introduce you to that in a sec. And obviously, we're facing a lot of challenges, and they're going to vary across different businesses, different industries. So what I want to do today is share with you some of the highlights from KPMG's report, talking about what Australian leaders say are their biggest challenges in the year ahead, but also ask you to reflect on what some of your biggest challenges are as well, so that we can make it really practical. And I'm not just going to read out the report or just go through the report, because you might as well do that yourself, and I'll show you how to do that. But I want to make this interactive and an opportunity for you to spend some time, like 45 minutes of uninterrupted time, just thinking about your challenges for the year ahead. As I said earlier, before I joined, there are quite a few people who I recognize the names on the attendance list, but there are many others who I don't. So for those who don't know me, I'm not going to tell you a lot about me. Those who do know me do know about that. And those who don't, you can go to gihanpereira.com and find out all about what I do in terms of my work as a business futurist. And it generally falls into two areas. So one is that people are interested in trends. They want to know what's coming up in the future. And I can't predict the future, and I can't help you predict the future, but I can perhaps help you be a little bit less surprised about what the future holds. And the second thing that's happening, especially as a result of the disruption from COVID over the last 2 years, is people want to know how to lead and manage in an uncertain future. So that's part of my role as a futurist as well, to help you understand what's coming up, but also to understand that we don't know exactly what's coming up, so we need to be nimble and agile and flexible for that kind of future. I've worked with lots of organizations. Here are some examples of organizations I've worked with at a leadership level. I think a couple of them, Amanda Redland's in there as well. So a couple of them are even represented here in the room today. So, and the interesting thing is that in the past, there have been many industries that have been going through massive disruption. It's just that it's hit everybody at the same time with this COVID-19 pandemic. And suddenly the same sort of disruption that was happening in healthcare, in financial services, in aged care, is suddenly hitting everybody as well. So some of the strategies and tactics that I've been helping people with over the last 10 years have suddenly become much more relevant for everybody else as well. Okay, so my 3 rules of engagement for all my presentations. I want to give you some things to think about today, so do put on your thinking caps, and I'll give you the chance to engage with me and to engage with the other people in the room today as well, but also be a bit playful. And people who know that if you've attended my online presentations in the past, you know that I encourage you to be playful and to interact as well as we go. And the last thing is, I really like you to have some practical things that you can take away and put into place. Okay, so this report was run by KPMG. It's called Keeping Us Up at Night. And what KPMG has done for the last 5 or 6 years, except for a couple of COVID-enforced breaks in the last couple of years, at the start of each year, they've surveyed Australian leaders about what their biggest challenges are for the year ahead. And so they had a couple of years break, and now they've just published their most recent report, Keeping Us Up at Night. And so what they do is they look at, they go to leaders, and for the first time this year, they've expanded it to more than just the C-suite, but they've also gone to emerging leaders and people at governance level. So they've expanded the scope of this report. Let me just turn something off here so that we don't... So we speed up our connection. So what they've done is they've found out what are your biggest challenges. And I'm going to share with you today the 4 biggest challenges that Australian leaders say that they're going to be facing in the 12 months ahead, or for the rest of 2022. These are not the only 4, but I decided to focus on the top 4 so we can look at each of them in depth rather than trying to look at 15 or 20 of them. And we're going to do them in reverse order. So we're going to do a bit of a countdown. So we'll do 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll look at each of them in a little bit of depth. Not as much I won't do them equally for each of them, but it'll give you the chance to reflect on what that means for you and your organization and your team. But because we're only going to look at 4, let's start by, I want to do a little bit of a poll here. So okay, great. So interesting. So we've got quite a range of responses coming in, and you can see the results here. Yeah, okay, interesting. I'll leave it up there for a couple more seconds. Right, okay, so thank you for doing that, and I can see results still coming in. But if you look at them, there's quite a few around people, there are some around productivity, digital makes an appearance there, and things around, some of the maintaining revenue, capital, and some things around people's mental health, things like exhaustion and things like that. And yeah, hybrid workplace, working from home, those sort of things are also on the list here. So as we continue, obviously keep in mind what your challenges are, because there'll be some overlap with that and what I'm going to talk about today, but there'll be some other things that will apply to you as well. So some of these exercises that we do in the next 40 minutes that we've got together, some of them will be relevant for you, and some of them, like some will be directly relevant, and others you may need to adapt a little bit to make them work for your workplace and your team and your organization. Okay, so let's have a look at these. Let's go through these, and as I said, we're going to do this in reverse order. Okay, so let's look at them with number 4. Number 4 on the list is digital transformation, and it did appear on the poll results as well. And now it's interesting that when KPMG first ran this survey, for the first 3 years when they ran this, digital transformation was number 1 on the list of biggest business challenges that leaders found. And now a few other things have knocked it off that perch as number 1. But as you'll see as we go through, there's still a very strong digital thread to all the things that we talk about. But digital transformation is number 1. And the way that the report described it, it was a whole idea of transformation and optimization, ensuring that you're doing it not just for the sake of being digital, but so you create organizational value as a result of it. And almost half the respondents rated this as one of their top biggest challenges for the year ahead. And it's not just KPMG who said this. There are other organizations, other research supports this as well. There's some research out of Macquarie that said that most senior leaders discovered that they had to, as a result of the pandemic, adopt new technology and accelerate that digital curve that perhaps some of them were forced to get on board, and others were already on, but it accelerated that curve. Some other research by McKinsey said that, again, as a result of the pandemic, most companies sped up their use of automation and AI. And so this, it's not that the pandemic slowed down digital transformation. Many organizations are saying that it's actually sped it up, and they've had 5 to 6 to 10 years of digital growth in 1 year. Or in this case now in 2 years, as a result of the pandemic. I do want to make the point though, and let's do a little bit of a practical exercise around this, as it's like all digital isn't the same. It's not all created equal. So when we talk about digital transformation and how digitally enabled are you in your organization, it operates at different levels. So let me just do this. Let me sketch something out for you. And I'm going to suggest to you that there are 5 levels that your organization might be at in terms of digital enabled. And you don't have to be at the top of those 5, but let me sketch them out for you. And I'd like you to think for yourself where you are. So let me draw a little model for you. And then I'll ask you, just in the chat room, just tell me which level you're at, and we'll see where we are in the room, because it varies for different organizations. Okay, so I'm going to sketch this out for you. So let's say that we've got, let's have a middle line here. And we're going to have 6 stages here. Okay, so the bottom one is the one that is not digital. This is the physical one. This is where you've got lots of atoms that you're moving around in your organization. So if you've got lots of paper, paper's made of atoms. If you've got files and filing cabinets, if you've got an office is made of atoms. If you go to a meeting room with a table and chairs and a whiteboard at the front, those are made of atoms. Okay, so that's not the digital part, but the next things, or the next 5 above that, take you to the next levels. So the first one that's digital is bits. So you convert your atoms into bits. Excuse me. Let's get rid of that shadow. So this is where you go paperless. So all your paper stuff instead becomes electronic documents. Instead of having physical meetings in a room, you have online meetings. Instead of having an office, people are working from their own properties and they collaborate online, and they do everything else they did without having to commute to an office. So how digital are you there? By converting your atoms into bits. Okay, now that's the first level, and many organizations are somewhere along that way, and some are a long way along that way. The next level I'm going to call cloud. So this is where your bits are in the cloud, and I'm thinking in specifically cloud here, a bit like the Apple iOS ecosystem, where it's like iCloud. So you can put your data stored online, but only so that you can be accessed from other devices, but only your own devices. So it's a private cloud like the Apple iCloud, and it just means that you can access it from anywhere, but only you can get access to it. The next level above that is where it's open. So open means that your data, your bits, are in the cloud, but they're in an external cloud which can be accessed by other people, other entities. Now, with your permission and with all the right amount of security around it, so maybe only the people in your organization can get access to it, or perhaps you have contractors and freelancers who you selectively give access to it, or you provide what's called an API, an application programming interface, that lets other organizations get access to some of that data, but again in a very controlled way. So a really good example here in Australia is the Australian banking system. So a few years ago we had legislation introduced that said that all banks have to provide this open interface to their customers' data. So you can imagine that somebody creates a smart app that I could buy or I could subscribe to, and it would access all my bank details and my credit card details, and it would tell me what I should be doing in terms of budgeting, in terms of loans, in terms of superannuation, because it has access to all my financial transactions. And it can, based on that, based on my patterns, it can tell me what to do to save money, to make money, to invest money. Now the thing is, in the past it wasn't possible for that app to get access to all that data, but now because of legislation the banks have to give access, provided the customers allow it, to customer data, to any apps outside that, through this open API, application programming interface. And you can see here that that's much more powerful than just having your things in a private cloud which only you can access. Having it in the cloud is useful because I can access it from my phone, my tablet, a laptop, anywhere, but having it open means that other people get access to it as well. And the next logical step from that is you give access to artificial intelligence, where you have now software that's intelligent software that can also have access to that data. And a big part of AI is learning, and it learns by gorging itself on huge amounts of data. That's why Netflix can recommend things that we should watch next, because it's got access to its AI. Will have a look at what millions of people are watching and can make recommendations for you. And within organizations, if you have the ability for AI to get access to your data, it means that it can actually help you make better decisions in your organization. And the last one, let me squeeze it in at the top. Okay, very few organizations will go to this level, and it's kind of flipping their business model. And it's saying, instead of being a business that services customers, what will be is a platform that allows other businesses to reach our customers or our market. Again, if I can pick an example that lots of people know about, the Apple App Store is an example of that. So Apple, Apple is a hardware company. It's a consumer electronics company. It makes most of its money by selling phones and tablets and laptops, but it generates billions and billions of dollars every year from its App Store. So Apple, of course, has its own apps, and when Steve Jobs was first creating the iPhone, he was dead against the idea of anybody else being able to install apps onto his App Store. But the rest of his team convinced him that that was a good idea, and so they've created this platform, this App Store, where anybody else can create a product that's made available to Apple customers on the App Store. So that is a platform for other developers to create huge value. And it's not just Apple, of course. Google, Android phones do the same thing. And Apple wasn't the first to do it. It was very common in kind of the tech community to have these kind of platforms, but Apple's the one that made it mainstream. So very few businesses will do that they'll create a platform for other people to make money by reaching out to customers. But a few of them do that. There are now energy companies. I think one of them, Schneider Electric, is one that was purely an energy provider, but now is like an energy platform that allows other providers to be able to reach customers. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you here the first little bit of interactive. Oh, Kamal says, yeah, Microsoft Windows. Yeah, so those sort of operating systems are very much platforms like that. Okay, so I'm just wondering, where are you? So I'm going to just have the chat open. And where are you? So are you at Atoms, Bits, Cloud, Open, AI, or Platform? And it doesn't mean you have to be 100% there. If I said to you broadly, which of these levels are you operating at? Say 80% of your organization, 80% of your processes, 80% of your business, where are you at? Okay, so a couple of people at Cloud, Bits and Cloud. Oh, right, actually there's quite a few people at Cloud. Open and AI, interesting, great. Yep, Cloud Open. Yeah, great. Cloud to Open. Okay, so we've got kind of got a smattering around here, right? So people at the cloud level, at the open level, which is great. Fantastic to see. Now, you may be asking, do I need to then move all the way up this chain to have more AI and become a platform? And the answer is no. And the reason why, just hold the thought for a sec, is because now what we've judged for ourselves is where are we? So internally, what's our organization like when we're talking about how digitally enabled we are? We'll now look at the other side of this when we talk about one of the other challenges that came up in the KPMG report. Any questions about that before I continue on this whole idea of how digitally enabled are you? I should warn you that some people and organizations and leaders get obsessed about this, and they say, what can we do to be really 100% AI enabled? And in most cases I say it's not necessary, because there's another way to think about which level you should be at, or which level you should aim for. Okay, don't see any questions just yet, so let me continue. Okay, let's continue. So the last thing before I leave this challenge is just to point out that all of digital transformation starts with people first, not about technology. And the organizations, the teams that do it the best, bring their people along on the journey. And the ones who fail at it, which unfortunately the research says is most of them, are the ones who try to enforce some technological solution, and they just don't bring their people along on the journey. Okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, number three in our list of the challenges that Australian business leaders are facing is this, look, I don't like this term, working remotely. Okay, and let me just tell you what KPMG said. So it's talking about not only the negatives, but both the challenges and the benefits of working remotely. It's something that's been happening in organizations for decades, for about 20 to 30 years. It's just the pandemic made it mainstream. And now, again, almost half of the respondents to the KPMG survey said this is something that's one of our biggest challenges keeping us up at night. Now, I should declare my interest in this. I've been passionate about this idea and championing this idea for decades, like 15, almost 20 years now. This is a photo of a much younger version of myself, where I was working at a cafe outside on my laptop. I had very limited internet access. That's in the times when you used to buy these little dongles which would charge you by the minute every time you accessed the internet. And I was sitting outside working. This is about 15 years ago, and a local journo was walking by, and he said, it seems like a good life that you're on holidays. And I said, I'm not, I'm working. And he thought that was such an amazing idea that he wrote up this little article that got published in the community newspaper. About 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, my friend Chris Pudney and I wrote this book, Out of Office, and it was written for employees to convince their bosses that they could work effectively away from an office. And he's talking about how to be productive, how to innovate and collaborate in that kind of either fully or hybrid working away from an office. So this is something that I've been passionate about for a while. It's just that as a result of the pandemic, it's become mainstream for many people. And one of the other people who's been really passionate about this is Chris Hurd, who's the CEO of First Base. And he says this, that offices are instant gratification distraction factories. Okay, I love that. Instant gratification distraction factories. And it makes it very difficult for work to get done. And you can see here, and the emphasis is mine, that he's talked about synchronous work and asynchronous work. So synchronous is where you're collaborating with somebody and they have to be there at the same time. So if you're in this presentation right now, live with me, then we're interacting synchronously because you and I both have to be here at the same time, even though we might be in different time zones. Asynchronous is where you don't have to do that. So synchronous work is like, let's all jump on a Teams meeting. Let's all jump on a Zoom meeting. Let me pick up the phone and call David. Okay, that's synchronous. Asynchronous is where you don't have to do that. So email ideally should be asynchronous, that I send you an email and you don't have to be at your desk at the same moment that I send that email. Now in offices, those things get blurred and most people aren't very good at doing asynchronous work well if they've been used to working in an office. So there's this there's a thing called the email courier, right, where I send you an email across the office to somebody who's working in the same, almost the same room as I am, and then 5 minutes later I walk over to your cubicle and I say, hey, do you get my email, right? And people in offices just get used to the idea that they've got their team around them so they can interrupt them whenever they want to. And now, over the last couple of years, people have recognized they can be as productive as they used to be if they're not working in an office, and sometimes even more productive. And of course, like managers and leaders are trying to get people back into the office because they say, oh, we can't collaborate and we can't build culture. Another thing that Chris Hurd says is that, like he posted this, he said, like, we're returning to the office because our culture is important, but this is the typical culture in an office cubicle for many people. Now, the challenge that many leaders are having is that they don't know how to lead when they can't see their people around them. So as a result of that, many leaders and managers are saying, oh, the pandemic's over, let's just get people back into the office because it's easier than me learning how to be a better leader. Okay. Now, not everyone's doing that. So one of my clients, Siemens, a big global industrial giant, in the middle of the pandemic, early in the pandemic, when most of Europe was in lockdown, Siemens, which is based in Germany, said that all their people around the world, the knowledge workers who could work away from an office, they are now, from that time, entitled to 2 to 3 days a week working somewhere away from their office. Now, at the time, working away from the office meant working from home, but they were thinking in the future where that didn't have to be the case, and they could be working from home, they could work from an internet cafe, from a cafe, they could be working from a co-working center, internet cafes, those sort of things. And they said, from now on, we're going to allow that to happen. The pandemic's given us the opportunity to do this. So the CEO of Siemens said, we trust people that if we tell them what goals they have to achieve and what we're all working towards, then we'll trust them to get the work done, and it doesn't really matter when and where that work gets done. And so there are some progressive organizations who were thinking that way before the pandemic and are now starting to think that way. So this idea of remote working, the reason it's a challenge for people, by the way, the reason I don't like the term working remotely is it implies that the office is the main place of work and anybody else is like a remote worker, like a second-class citizen. And I don't think that's the right way we should be thinking about it. I prefer the term distributed teams, but it hasn't really caught on with everybody. So let's go with remote work for the moment. And there are lots of different ways of what the workplace of the future can look like when you separate and decouple the whole idea of work and place. So work is what gets done, place is where it happens. Okay, and when you decouple that, which many organizations are thinking about now because the pandemic's forced it on them, you see a lot of other possibilities and opportunities. So I collected some headlines from news media, from mainstream and some other media over the last few weeks and months around what the future of the workplace might look like, or if you like, the workplace of the future. So here are a couple. Here's one: small business owners say remote work made them better team leaders because they had to learn to collaborate and focus on objectives rather than processes. The Wall Street Journal says that many Gen Zs may never work in an office. Does that matter? The Sydney Morning Herald recently said in 10 years, what we call now remote work will just be called work. Okay, it's not all positive. It's all not all beer and skittles. So it says that expanding remote work won't inherently empower workers, but it can have some effect. There's a whole bunch of others why more bosses say yes when employees want flexibility. 4-day work weeks are becoming a thing now, and there are companies and even countries that are experimenting with that idea right at the moment. This one from the AF, from the Fin Review, hybrid working enters a third dimension. It makes you think about the metaverse, and even though the Fin Review article wasn't specifically about that, the metaverse idea, which is gaining a bit of traction at the moment, is something that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about the future. And it may be 5 or 10 years away before we completely embrace that, but it is something we should think about. So I want to just put you into, give you the chance to have a chat very briefly with the other people in the room about how it's working out for you. And what I mean by that is if you were in an office and you had all your team in an office, or you've just become, and now you have to be more flexible, or you're becoming more flexible anyway, how's it working for you? Because this is kind of a new area for many people, and I can't give you some direct answers, but there's a lot of intelligence in the room. So I'm going to just put you in little small rooms to have a little bit of a quick chat around this. So we won't spend a lot of time on this. Okay, welcome back everyone. If you got a great idea from somebody else in the room, or you want to share your great idea, please feel free to put that in the chat. I see a couple of questions have come in and I'll respond to them. So David said, do I still frequent the cafe? And I do. So that's another one of my regular things. Alan says, it's a really good question that Alan's asked about the education system. Says, Gihan, if this is a future way of work, how should schools be schools be developing to prepare students for this work model? And it's one of the challenges. I work with some schools, and some of them are, I guess, self-selecting. The ones who should choose to work with me are the ones who are thinking about progressive ways of working within the confines of the education system to allow things like this. So I think in the future, why can't classrooms be literally people like kids working together from with people from literally anywhere around the world, and they might be in different time zones, but they might be speaking different languages, but you've got automatic translation through their online conferencing software, and they can collaborate in that way. So I think it's a big question, Alan, and there are a lot of things that we should be doing to help young people be ready for this future of work. And yeah, look, absolutely, I think it's a big question, and I'll stop speaking now, otherwise I'll continue on my soapbox for the rest of the time. Any other questions or comments? Okay, you'll get another chance to do that soon, so let's continue. Okay, so this third area, which is actually number 2 on the list of the biggest challenges that Australian leaders said that they're facing. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because, well, I'll explain why, but the challenge is the issue of cybersecurity, and especially in a more digitized, more connected world, it's become more important than ever before. So the way the report put it was this idea of dealing with cyber vulnerability, and around 50% of the leaders surveyed said this was one of their biggest challenges. And the World Economic Forum says that this idea of cyber attacks, they're in the top 10 global risks. Not only top 10 global business risks, but they're top 10 risks for our world. So it's right up there with, climate change and political instability, as we're seeing even now, things like supply chains, poverty, many of those issues. Cybersecurity is among those, and simply because so much of our world is digital now. I like this stat, this research that said that 2/3, more than 2/3, 70% of organizations say that artificial intelligence is necessary to be able to respond to cyber attacks. And I look at that and I say, yeah, that's true. And I feel a bit sorry for the 30% of organizations who aren't saying that, because it absolutely is necessary. It's like this escalating arms race. We're trying to defend against these attackers, and they're using increasingly sophisticated ways to breach our defenses. So then we try to build ways to defend ourselves. They use artificial intelligence to attack us. We build artificial intelligence into our defense systems, and so on. And it escalates and escalates. And as Kamal says, yeah, it's AI versus AI, and absolutely is that at the moment. And again, I'll come back to something I said earlier, which is I talked about this with digital transformation. It's true for cybersecurity as well. It's not about technology first. even though that technology is very important, it's about people. So most of the cyber breaches, cybersecurity breaches that you hear about now are not because some clever programmer found some flaw in some Microsoft Windows update and they hadn't had time to patch it up yet. That does happen, but most of them happen because somebody opens an email with a link to some banking details, or they tell them that their password's out of date, or they get a happy birthday greeting and they click that and they download some malware. Or as recently happened in Europe, where somebody in a major bank got a phone call, supposedly from their boss, who was the head of the bank, saying, can you make this money transfer? And had a conversation with them and was convinced that it was their boss speaking to them, when in fact it was some artificial intelligence software that had learnt not only to speak with the boss's voice and accent, but also learned the conversational tones, so that it sounded like you're actually getting instructions over the phone from their boss. So that's an example of where AI is being used by cyber attackers. And the reason I don't want to spend much more time on this is that I can't really offer you any advice on this or suggestions, except to say, make sure that you work with experts to look after your cybersecurity. There could be in-house experts, or you outsource your work to people who really know this, because this is no longer something that we can manage internally if we don't have that expertise in-house. Kamal says, I can help with cybersecurity. Great. So Kamal Salwan, who's on the call at the moment. Kamal, do you want to just put best contact details, even if it's a web address or something where people can get in touch with you around that? So Kamal helps organizations with digital transformation. He's based in Melbourne, and I think he works with people all around the world. And he's got partners around the world who work with him as well. So Kamal, if you want to, share in the chat your contact details anytime before we finish up here. Okay, so let's do drum roll. Number one. The number one biggest challenge that Australian leaders said that they're facing in 2022 is, again, around digital, but it's around the people side of digital. It's making sure that we have digitally savvy people in our organizations. And I think it's really interesting the way that the report phrased it. So it's about talent acquisition, retention, and upskilling to be prepared for a more digitized future. And if you remember, the other three that I mentioned were around about the 45-50%, and this one was a whopping 70% of leaders said this was one of their biggest challenges. And in a way, I'm really happy. I'm really happy that leaders are recognizing that it is about people first, not about technology, but also understanding that there is a challenge that they have to work through. And the point I want to make in this area is, okay, we understand that people are important, but I also want you to get what a more digitized future means, because it might not be only what you're thinking about, and it might be broader than what you're thinking. And I'm saying this not because I know the people here today, but because I've worked with a lot of leaders and teams and organizations, and many of them don't really understand what a more digitized future, like how broad that is. They think it's about technology, which is absolutely true, but it goes beyond that. Let me give you a simple example. That's something that was in the news recently. We all saw this photo, I think just before Australia Day, when our Australian of the Year was scowling at the Prime Minister in this photo, and it definitely made headlines in mainstream media. But the interesting thing was that it wasn't only in mainstream media, and other people who were championing Grace Tame's cause were posting in other areas as well. So the satirical newspaper published an article, and that was widely shared on social media. Reddit, so Reddit, which has lots and lots of discussions about any topic under the sun, was talking about it. Grace Tame a few months ago was tweeting about something else that Scott Morrison said, a witty response to something that he was doing that she thought was inappropriate. This is my favorite example. And these are sort of things that people are doing, ordinary people are doing now in areas that are outside the mainstream. And it's because we live in a more digitized world and people have access to digital technologies. And if you want to support or oppose a cause, you've got the means to do that. And so what has child sexual abuse got to do with the digitized future? It's got everything, because the people supporting it have got access to digital tools that let them reach the world. And regardless of what your political beliefs are, your beliefs around that, I think you know mine, but regardless of that, we're living in this digitized future now. And the warning I've got for you is to just be aware of this gap. So the gap between where you are now as an organization internally and this digitized world that is outside for your customers, your clients, your patients, your community, your external stakeholders. What are they expecting from you in this more digitized future? So I'm going to just share with you, and we won't do this in a breakout room, but I'll give you some examples of what a more digitized future might look like for your external stakeholders, and I'll ask you to think for yourself, where do you fit into that? So just a few examples. This is not comprehensive, but just a few. So more and more people are walking around with massive computers in their pockets or their purses. So they're accessing stuff through mobile devices. So for example, if you're a retailer, people want to be able to walk into your, order online and then walk into your store, or maybe walk into your store, order online, and then go and click and collect. Or they want to be able to take a photograph of somebody wearing some clothes or using some technology or using some product, and automatically some artificial intelligence will recognize that photo, it'll bring up an ad for your store, and then they'll go and buy it in your store. They want to be able to talk into their phone rather than typing out what they're searching for, because they're doing this through mobile devices. So that's a technology example, but more broadly than that, we have these moments of truth. So Jan Carlson from Scandinavian Airlines, many decades ago, he came up with this concept which he taught everybody in the organization. He said every engagement, every time a customer engages with us, whether it's at a check-in desk or online with the cabin crew or wherever, those are the moments of truth, and that's what's going to make or break us. And more now, our customers, our clients, our community, our stakeholders are expecting us to have digitized moments of truth. So there are people who'd hate to call a 1-800 number or 1-3 number because they don't want to talk to a person to get help. They want to be on their phone and post to their Twitter account and expect customer support to get back to them and resolve their issue. Not everybody, but some people are like that. Another example more broadly is we're going towards kind of the end of ownership in many products. So if you've got a whole stack of CDs or DVDs, as I do, then you know what it's like to own music. But now we don't. Like, we now have access to all the music in the world for $10 to $15 a month through services like Spotify. And we don't own it. We rent it. But because it's digital, the cost of renting it to provide for Spotify to provide that to us is so tiny that we get access to more for less money, but we don't own it. Now that's true of music, of course, and movies, but also bigger things like cars and houses and parking spaces and even clothes, where you can rent clothes as you want them on a monthly subscription. So if you're selling stuff, just be aware that maybe people aren't going to be buying anymore. They want to move to a rent, subscription, membership kind of model, perhaps. Here's another one, which is around social media influence. I shared that example of Grace Tame earlier around that we've now got customers who aren't only interacting with us, because that used to be the way that customers used to interact. They could only interact with us, but now they can interact with other customers, other stakeholders, even other future customers. Another example, there's a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplaces, and again, some of those causes have become raised in our consciousness because they've been shared by people who have access to, ordinary people have access to digital technology. And again, in the past, you could have a talk around the barbecue about something that you were upset about, but it would be hard to spread that around the world. And the hierarchical systems that are in place to prevent that meant that it was very difficult to get traction. But now, in our digitized future, everyone's got access to that. They don't all have the same reach, but they've all got access to it. And the last one's one that I mentioned before. The whole idea of flexible work is as a result of us living in this more digitized future, that we are able to collaborate when we're not physically in the same space. In the future, maybe we'll be collaborating in a virtual space, in a metaverse kind of area. Okay, so those are just some examples of how the rest of the world might be thinking about and expecting us to perform. So if you go back to what I showed you before, remember, they're looking at this like, where are you at the moment? The real question is not so much where are you and what level of enablement are you at. The real question is how does that match and how does that fit with where your customers are? Your customers, clients, other stakeholders, because that's a really important thing. It's like, if there's a match, great. If there isn't, and if there's a gap, then those are the expectations that you need to manage, and that's where you should move. So I always say start with the future, start from outside, and understand the problems that you're solving for your customers and clients first, and then build your organization to make sure that it's solving those problems. Okay, so quick summary before we finish. So we talked about those 4 things and those 4 challenges. So I'll do them just in summary again, but let's do 1, 2, 3, 4 in this order. Number 1 is this whole idea of having digitally savvy people. The second biggest challenge was around cybersecurity. The third one, I don't like the term, I prefer distributed teams, but this idea of working remotely and having flexible workplaces. And the last one is this idea of digital transformation. So I wonder whether yours appeared on that list. Okay, so when I asked you to do the poll at the start and say, what are your challenges? There are a whole bunch of others that didn't make that list. So we talk about things like, climate change didn't make that list, organizations that are providing more purpose and meaning, diversity in leadership, particularly in senior leadership, and a whole bunch of other things that are also perhaps challenges that you're facing in the year ahead. Now, it's not that those aren't important, they just didn't make the top 4. And if you want to read the report, it's easy to find, it's free. KPMG, just do a Google search, KPMG Keeping Us Up at Night, and you'll get access to that report. I've also done another little summary of this in, if you go to gihanpereira.tv, you'll get a compressed version of this presentation that I've done here, which talks about the 4 challenges that we've done, but without the interactive exercises. So if you want to share it with somebody in your team, then you might want to play that video for them rather than go through this whole recording. So if you're here live, you will get a copy of the recording, and if you're watching this recording, then obviously you can do the activities with your team as well. If you'd like to engage with me, for people who know me, you know that I do a number of things, keynote presentations, I do masterclasses to delve more deeply into this. I don't actually help organizations with digital transformation at a detailed level, but there are people like Kamal who can do that, as well as I help with your future planning. So if you're doing any strategic planning and you want me to give you the big picture perspective that then you can feed into your strategic planning, I can help you with that as well. So I just want to give you my last piece of advice, which I often give at the end of my presentations. And look, I think in the last 2 years, this has become less necessary for me to say, don't wait for all your ducks to line up in a row, don't wait for the world to be perfect, because it just won't be. So start before you're ready, because the world won't wait for you. And that's the best way to be fit for the future. So thanks everyone. Thank you for coming along and taking part. I hope you got some value, and I really hope that you put that value into place as soon as possible. So start with something small, but get started. Thanks everyone. Love to have a conversation with you if you want to. If you want to connect with me, gihanpereira.com. All my contact details are there. And in the meantime, stay safe and healthy. I'll see you in the future. Bye everyone.